Hello class, it's Sam again. We are here now with Professor of Philosophy of Education. Actually, he's a director of an honor center at Iona College, James Stillwaggon. And James, the question is simple. What is philosophy, parentheses, optional, of education?
Well, I don't know. I think that's one way to start. I think that the answer is going to be entirely different, as you'll probably find with each person you speak to about the topic. People address it in lots of different ways. For some, it's a question of the political conditions of schooling. For others, it's a question of how knowledge is made. For others, it has to do with the relational ethics between teachers and students. There's a whole host of ways that we can conceive of philosophy of education, and most people who do philosophy of education focus on one of these very narrow, minor areas, as is the typical practice of academic work. What these hold in common, and I think what they hold in common with the question of philosophy as a whole, is the idea of the conditions of flourishing, the conditions under which humanity happens and happens in particular ways. These have always been the largest questions that philosophers have faced since the dawn of philosophy, especially since the Greeks. We've asked the questions of how is it that we become human, what does it mean to be a human, and how is it best to be a human. Another way that we can look at this question is through Jean-Francois Lyotard's question that he poses in the beginning of a collection of essays called The Inhuman, where he posits the idea, he says, humans are not born human the way that cats are born cats. In other words, when a cat is born a cat, it has all the attributes of a cat, at least within a few hours it does. Whereas a human being, when it is born, has almost none of the things that we think of as typically human. It has no language, which we typically think of as human. It has arguably no emotion. It has no ability to relate except in a very primary physical way. And it's only through the technologies of being human, the notions of language, of community, of practices that one develops into a human being and develops some of those purposes, and as a result is able to question those purposes and come to understand them. And that, I think, is what holds philosophy of education and maybe philosophy as a whole together as a practice, is that we are always looking and always dissatisfied with the answers that we get to the question of how it is that we became beings that question the conditions of our own being. How's that?
Sounds great. Thank you.